The way forward is ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ। 2024 ਦੀ ਜਨਰਲ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਿਰ ਤੇ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਹਰ ਵਾਰ ਸੁਣਦੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਸਾਡੀ ਜਨਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੀ ਮੋਸਟ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ। ਇਹ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਇਸ ਵਾਰੀ ਵਾਕਈ ਹੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਹੈ। ਦੋਨੋਂ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਪਾਰਟੀਆਂ ਹਨ ਉਹ ਕੁਝ ਬੜੀ ਐਕਸਟ੍ਰੀਮ ਪੋਜੀਸ਼ਨਸ ਲੈ ਰਹੀ ਹਨ। ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਸ਼ੀਅਲ ਕੈਂਡੀਡੇਟ ਜਿੱਤੇ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਐਸੀ ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ ਜੋ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਸੇ ਲੈਵਲ ਤੇ ਠੱਲ ਪਾ ਸਕੇ, ਕਿਸੇ ਲੈਵਲ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਰੋਕ ਸਕੇ ਔਰ ਇੱਕ ਸੈਂਟਰਿਸਟ ਪੋਜੀਸ਼ਨ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇਹ ਕੰਟਰੀ ਲੈਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਾਇਮ ਰਹੀਏ। Today, we are very thankful to the New York 3rd Congressional District Democratic candidate for the Congress, Mr. John Avlon, to take out his time to speak with our viewers. John, thank you so much for taking out the time. We understand this must be such a busy time of the campaign.
It is, Harjot, but it's an honor to speak with you as always, my friend. We've met a number of times over the course of this campaign, and I said I'd do it, and I keep my promises. So it's great to be with you.
We appreciate that. John, see, I personally and we value the institution of Congress more than anything else in the country. You know, we understand that even President is Article 2, Article 1 is Congress. When people got together and we decided that, yes, we are capable of governing ourselves, running a country. It's very important that we know the candidate that we are sending to the Congress. We know who is representing, who is fighting for us. So this is an opportunity for our viewers to getting to know you. I would, first of all, ask you to tell us in your own words, what was the reason, what was your inspiration to run for this office?
Sure. Thank you, Arjun. I appreciate that. I'm not a politician. This is a time for citizens to step up, roll up their sleeves, and participate in the democratic process, because the stakes of this election are so huge for the community and the country we all love. I've been a journalist for most of the past 20 years. I was a CNN anchor and analyst. I left that position to run here in New York's 1st District. We live in Sag Harbor. And before that, I'd been editor-in-chief of the Daily Beast, and I write books, history books about Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. I've worked for Democrats and Republicans in the past. I'm a country over party guy. I was the speechwriter for the mayor of New York during the attacks of 9/11 and wrote the eulogies for the firefighters and police officers. But to me, this is a time to put principles above party. It's a time to put country above party. And at the end of the day, my wife and I, we were discussing whether we would take this step as a family, because we've got 2 small young kids, and I'm the grandson of immigrants. I love them very much, and so I was very close to the immigrant experience, and we're a nation of immigrants. But they taught me, as I think immigrant families often teach their kids and their grandkids, you don't take the blessings of America for granted, and that means when American democracy is in danger, as I believe it is now, you step up. You step up to save it. You do your part to defend it. And I didn't want to look at my kids and say I could have done more when it mattered most. And that's why I'm running for Congress.
John, we'll talk about some of your policy positions during the course of this interview. But I would like my viewers to know, besides the policy positions, I think 2 things that we really need in the Congress at this time. One is decency and kindness. And we are so appreciative that you value those things. We appreciate, we thank you for that. And the other thing is bipartisanship. Yes. We understand we need our candidates to be able to work across the aisle. I must tell my viewers, you're married to a Republican. You have a Republican childhood friend. You have worked in Republican administrations, and you're running as a Democratic candidate. That's the kind of person we need who can, not take extreme positions and work across the aisle. Can you say a couple of words on the importance of working with bipartisanship at this stage?
I can and I will, and it's an honor to do so, because it's what I deeply believe and what I've always believed. That's how democracy works.
Mhm.
You know, you go back to the earliest days of our democratic republic, and we are all imperfect people trying to form a more perfect union. But the U.S. Constitution is formed on constructive compromise. It's reasoning together. Citizens reasoning together using a common set of facts that didn't used to need to be said, but now it does, unfortunately, to reason together to figure out how to solve the common problems we face. And no one's got a monopoly on the truth. No party's got a monopoly on good people or good ideas. I'm married to a Republican, as you say. But I do feel that, at this particular point in our history, that the Democratic Party is the party that believes in bipartisanship and building a Big Tent. In the first 2 years of the Biden administration, over 300 pieces of bipartisan legislation got passed, including the CHIPS Act, reshoring essential manufacturing, technology planning for the future, infrastructure bills, big things. And that go to the heart of what I think the number one theme of my campaign is, which is rebuild the middle of our politics, rebuild the middle of our economy, because those two things go together. I've studied how democracies derail. This is something the founding fathers like George Washington warned about. I wrote a book called Washington's Farewell about his warning to future generations. And the number one danger is hyperpartisanship, what we would call hyperpartisanship, what they called faction. That's how democracies get taken offline. And so that's what we need to, I've been warning against it for a long time in my writings and my books and in my commentary on CNN and other places. But this is a time to step up and actually not talk, but do something. This is a time where citizens all need to step up, because you cannot overstate the consequences of this election for the trajectory of the 21st century. And we got to give people hope that we can build something better on the other side of this toxic tribalism. That means working together. I'm a centrist. My first book was a history of centrist leaders in American politics. I think a lot of people shy away from that label, particularly in polarized times. I think we need a strong and vital center in our politics. That's the kind of change I believe in, what I hope to represent in Congress, because I think that's where most folks are. I think we need to stand up against illiberalism on the far left or the far right, wherever it comes from. Be consistent. Put your principles above political parties. Put your country above party, and then we'll heal our divides. We'll get to reason together again, because we are a great country. But we need to reassert that everyone needs to vote. We need to vote together to bring our country together. And that's why I've been committed from the beginning to build a broad, bipartisan, patriotic coalition to defend American democracy. That's what we can do here in the 1st District. If we win here, we'll have ripple effects across the country.
John, we appreciate that. We thank you for this rhetoric. John, our viewers are mostly immigrants.
Yes.
We say it's a nation of immigrants, but for some time, with some messages coming out of some campaigns, people feel concerned.
Yes.
We understand that there's a border crosses. Every country needs to control the number of immigrants. Even if it's open to all immigrants, they need to control the number of immigrants that come into the country at a particular time. There are issues around there, but it's very important that we address this issue of immigration, because it goes out of control on either side. It won't be not a very suitable position for anyone in this country. We would like to talk more about that with you. आज ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ 1st Congressional District ਦੇ candidate John Avlon ਦੇ ਨਾਲ. John, so we were started talking about immigration. See, we all say that this is a country of immigrants. We all understand that. There are concerns that there has been an uncontrolled number of people coming into the country from a southern border, particularly. I would address that later. The first thing I would like you to ask is this. People were very disheartened. I must tell you, around 2018, 2019, we heard some statements from President Donald Trump and some people from his party, which were, essentially saying there was some Congress particular race being true Americans and others, in spite of being born in this country, still being outsiders.
When you hear that kind of rhetoric, I think you need to understand it with a sense of historic perspective, but also take it on face value. We are a nation of immigrants, uniquely. The United States of America has the distinction of being the first nation in the history of the world founded on an idea and not a tribal identity. That means we're open to anyone who comes here willingly and wants to subscribe to our ideals and works together. Now, that aperture has opened over time. It's hard for us to appreciate today, for example, that in the founding era, the fact that English and French and Germans could live together in the same country seemed crazy. Right? Differences that we barely recognize today because those countries had been fighting each other for centuries. You had Catholics and Protestants living together. That seemed crazy. And yet, as our country has grown and welcomed in successive waves of immigration, we no longer recognize those differences. We lump them into terms like Christian or white, whatever that means, because the term white itself has been malleable over time. My grandparents came here just over a century ago, and they faced a degree of discrimination. They were Greek immigrants. We don't remember it, but the Irish, the Italian, the Greek immigrants faced discrimination from previous waves of immigrants who came here. They were considered, there was suspicion about whether their stock, their culture could assimilate and make Americans. And over time, we grow, we evolve, we get better because of immigrants. Why? Because immigrants renew our faith. Vast majority of new businesses, for example, are started by new immigrants. Immigration is our greatest renewable resource. And so when we see these periodic attempts to demonize the most recent waves of immigrants, that's why I say we got to view it with historic perspective, because it's happened to every wave of immigration. And that should create a little bit of humility and wisdom and perspective, some pattern recognition around what that impulse is. I think that what we're seeing today is not a great deal different than past nativist movements we've seen. And even George Washington warned against what he called the impostratures of pretended patriotism, which is to say people who say, I'm more American than you. He said, that's the least American thing you can do. Now, I also think that not everybody who wants to make sure that we have a functioning border is motivated by bigoted impulses. I think that's an incorrect thing to say. I hear a lot from recent immigrants who say, look, my family worked hard to come in the right way, and this system is broken right now. That's a fair point. Part of my reason for feeling a sense of urgency at getting comprehensive immigration reform is because we're cutting ourselves off from the greatest renewable resource, which is immigration. We need an immigration system that works. And as a down payment, I'm fine with front-loading border security. And but we really need to, comprehensive, and I'll get into that. But let's talk about the border security piece, because there's border security, there's DACA, there's the economic benefits. There was a lot of understandable frustration with the migrant crisis that has come to our state, and people were rightfully frustrated by that. They're frustrated at seeing undocumented workers, undercutting, legal workers who, it creates an unfair competition playing field, right? It creates a sense of civic disorder. My opponent and the Republicans, Democrats say we want comprehensive immigration reform. Republicans say, no, we want standalone border security. Democrats say, okay, fine. And that's because they're holding up aid to Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel as a result. Democrats negotiated with a conservative Oklahoma senator named James Lankford to come up with what the Wall Street Journal said was the toughest border security bill anyone had ever seen. It would have added 1,500 border agents. It was endorsed by the Border Patrol Agents Association. It would have stopped the policy known as catch and release. It would have hired more judges to adjudicate asylum claims, so we don't have a crazy situation where people show up at the border, say they've got asylum, and then wander around the country for 4.5 years without an ability to work, which creates a black market problem. It also, by the way, would have increased penalties and stopped the flow of fentanyl into our country and cracked down even further on human trafficking. All of things that we should be able to agree on. And they came up with a bill that was ready to pass the Senate. And then Donald Trump, who'd been raising a lot of the anger at immigrants over the course of his campaigns, he said stop. He did not want to fix the problem.
Mhm.
He did not want to fix the problem. He wanted the problem to continue so he could use it as a political issue. And when Donald Trump pulled the plug on that legislation, and don't believe me, listen to Mitch McConnell say that's what happened. Listen to Senator Langsford say that's what happened. Donald Trump pulled the plug, and Nick LaLota, the current congressman from New York's 1st District, he took the knee. He could have stayed silent. He didn't need to take a stand, but he decided to pile on with a mock it, firing off a tweet saying, my 9-year-old could have done a better job negotiating bedtime than James Lankford did on this bill. He was trying to suck up to Donald Trump to show him that he could mock, right? Get cheers from the cheap seats, right? Playing Twitter troll rather than trying to solve problems that we face that are urgent. And so the bill didn't pass. I'd vote for that bill on day one. Not only that, I'd say that if folks want to fearmonger off migrants, and then fundraise off those fears, benefit politically, and then refuse to fix it, I think that's a firing offense. I think it's a firing offense. And what we really need to do, of course, is have comprehensive immigration reform. Because we need border security so people have faith that the system works, but it's also less good for the economy. We need temporary workers in this country. We need H-2A visas for people who work on migrant farms. We need H-1B visas, H-2A visas. We need to make sure that we've got a functioning immigration system. I'll tell you, go even a step further. Every single foreign student who comes to the United States to get educated and gets a PhD should come with a green card stamped to that diploma. We want to keep that talent in the country, not educate and kick them out. That's crazy. And so that's what comprehensive immigration can do. And then also provide a pathway to citizenship for the dreamers who've been languishing in limbo for far too long. That's the win-win. That's what we need to work towards. That's what we need to get done. Because we need to stop demonizing migrants and stop demonizing immigration, because we're cutting ourselves off from our greatest renewable resource. And I honor you and your community for pursuing your American dream and any understanding of American history and how it works and the different waves of immigration. And my grandparents were part of a wave just a little while back. And they shut down immigration in the 1920s, shortly after they got here for a time. Mm-hmm. Let's have some kindness, compassion, common sense. Let's learn from our history. Let's address people's rightful concerns, but stop demonizing migrants and immigrants. We need more legal immigration in this country. We need less illegal immigration. That shouldn't be controversial. That's one example of how you solve a problem that ultimately brings people together. That's what I commit to doing.
Yeah. There's one thing, as you said, there are a lot of people who feel that uncontrolled number of people coming to the country is not necessarily inspired by bigotry or racism, but we just don't understand the need to demonize those people, calling them rapists and killers and cat eaters and dogs eaters.
I want to make
a need for that.
I want to make an important distinction here, Arjad.
Yes.
Because I think we get into trouble as a country, as a species, as human beings, when we engage in group blame. I deeply believe this. Most of the evils in the world have occurred when people are seen primarily as a member of a group rather than the individual that they are. I deeply believe that. Most of the evils in the world occur when human beings are judged as a member of a group rather than as an individual. I'm trying to make sure that I understand the righteous frustration some folks have with a broken system, and I'm not willing to call all of them bigots. But when you look at the rhetoric that you just referred to, what we saw in Springfield, Ohio, fun fact, my mother was born in Springfield, Ohio. Her immigrant father was serving in the Second World War. There was an air base there. And we know now that the Trump and Vance campaign told the candidates that these were not illegal migrants. They were here legally to do work. The mayor says it, and the company owners say they're doing good work. They knew that this story wasn't true. And they told a story that was a lie, intentionally. Why? To inflame and divide. And that draws on not the better angels of our nature, as Abraham Lincoln once said, but the darkest angels of our nature, if you will. So that kind of rhetoric, there's no other explanation. That is designed to divide. That is designed to demonize. That is totally unacceptable, and I don't make excuses for that one bit.
John, there are few other fundamental things that we would like to talk about today. We are so blessed to have not just a candidate, but a historian and a philosopher who I believe understands America so well. And we need to perpetuate that great American spirit, and that's what needs to be spread around. ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਨਿਊਯਾਰਕ ਫਰਸਟ ਕੰਗਰੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਡਿਸਟ੍ਰਿਕਟ ਦੇ ਕੈਂਡੀਡੇਟ ਜੌਨ ਐਵਲੌਨ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ। John, we say, we believe that we are at an inflection point, in this country's history, not just socially, but economically also. Their policies on both sides, some are trying to expand the government too much, and there is a genuine, we call it conservative pushback against it. Some might not be genuine, but there might be some genuine questioning as a conservative would think, somebody believing in those Jeffersonian principles. And there are people, they're expanding after what Wilson did and FDR did, and these are different understandings. They all might have the common good of the American people in their minds, but country is being driven in particular ways. We want to understand from you. We want to know, where does our congressman stand? Where do you understand is this economic debate going?
Sort of about economic philosophy, if you will, or just yes. Overall the American.
I would say the intervention of the government. We are seeing a lot of change now. 30 years back, we were talking about GATT. We were talking about, removal of all tariffs. Now everyone is talking about tariffs. President Biden has put tariffs on Chinese cars. President Trump wants to put tariffs on everything. I think the whole economy, as we understand, few years back, is changing. I think.
Well, look. I mean, yes. This is, this is why we engage in civic debates. We advance ideas. Sometimes they see like outliers, then they come back. It's another reason why it's important to study history. Because you can see, how things worked. And the thing about tariffs is they often, especially in a global trading environment, they often end up increasing costs and have an inflationary effect on the goods and services that people buy in the United States. Now, there is a case to be made for targeted tariffs, particularly against hostile foreign powers. Mostly because we don't want to be dependent on them. Now, it cuts both ways, right? So, George Washington used to talk a lot about the importance of commercial relations with all, political dependence on none. And trade is good. Trade helps stop wars. But it's really important. The United States, and in any country, I would argue, but especially the United States, has its ability to have essential manufacturing at home, right? Essential manufacturing. We saw this problem during COVID, right? We couldn't produce the PPE that we depended upon. This is what the CHIPS Act was designed to anticipate. If, God forbid, China tries to take Taiwan, which I don't believe it should or ultimately could, obviously, the world economy and the U.S. domestic economy would be decimated because we are disproportionately dependent upon chips made in Taiwan right now. So what do? You say, okay, we're going to pass a bipartisan bill to come up with the strategy to make sure we're reshoring essential manufacturing, including the semiconductor chips, because we're anticipating that problem. That's actually a really good example of government working. I think at the end of the day, I can draw on inspiration. If you want to understand me, really read my book, Washington's Farewell. Read my book, Lincoln and the Fight for Peace. Read my first book, was a history of centrists in American politics, centrist leaders, and how some succeed and some fail. But I think, I am a big believer in the vital center. What does that mean? What it means is it's not a mushy middle position between two extremes. It means focusing on consistent application of liberal democracy, liberal values, standing up to illiberalism, whether it comes from the far right or the far left. It means focusing on where we can find common ground. It means not putting your partisan blinders on when you're trying to solve problems. It means having an evidence, fact-based conversation, focusing on common ground to pursue the common good. And that's not too much to ask. I think the government, sets up I think the proper role of government, Abraham Lincoln said, is to do for individuals and communities what they can't do so well for themselves. For myself, it means that the proper role of government is to create a secure framework within which people are able to live their lives to the best of their ability. And so that means that, public safety is an important role of government. Secure borders, an important role of government. Making sure we have a rules and law-based society is an important role of government. Making sure the streets are clean and that people are safe and that we're anticipating large-scale problems, like climate change, that are slow-moving problems, and that as a species, we're not particularly well suited to help. It means that we don't put party over country. We put country over party. Mm-hmm. And that has a certain clarity. I think people get tied up in knots trying to figure out how to contort their position to excuse something that they would find inexcusable if it came from a member of the opposite political party. If a Democratic president tried to overturn an election on the back of a lie that led to an attack on the Capitol, I would be the first one condemning that person. It would be a no-brainer. And I know that most Republicans would do the same, but they're only doing it in this context. They would do it to a Democrat, but not to a Republican. I think that's a dereliction of duty. That's putting party over principle. It's the wrong thing to do. And so I think we need to take a hard line on that, but do it in a way that says the opportunity of this election is to build a broad bipartisan coalition to defend our democracy. Mm-hmm. That's the right way to think about this. And that's this opportunity in our country. I think that's an exciting opportunity if we meet this test. Everyone's got to get out and vote this time. You can't sit this one out. This is an election that is going to determine not just country, but century and world your families will live in. And it's particularly acute for immigrant families. I mean, I was so struck by one of the images coming out of the two conventions, put side by side. One was a sea of signs saying USA out of the Democratic Convention. The other was a sea of signs in the Republican Convention that said mass deportations now. Got a presidential candidate who's talking about bloody mass deportations, armed mass deportations. Mm-hmm. That's not the America we know. That's not the America we want to live in.
Yeah, no, John, I'm so glad you say this, and that's why, we keep trying to tell our viewers how important this election is, and I believe that everyone understands how important this election is. But John, now I'll come to some local issues because all elections are local, right? They always say that. You have always talked about building the middle class and protecting the middle class in New York, at least on the island. People are losing their kids to other states.
Yes.
Because the kids, despite their good education, despite their good jobs, are not being able to afford new houses here. So they're moving to other states to buy those houses.
Yes.
Are you going to do anything about those SALT deductions that our people enjoy?
100%. That is the number one economic action we need to take to rebuild the middle of our economy. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump and the Republicans raised our taxes by taking away the state and local tax deduction that had been in place for a century. And it's an issue of fairness because we in New York give more to the federal government than we get back. Red states, quote unquote, tend to get more than they give.
That is most of the Democratic states, right? Most of the blue states. Yeah.
So when you're talking to folks about the stakes of this election, mm-hmm. maybe they say, well, I don't like politics. I just really want to focus on making money for my family. Okay. Mm-hmm. Maybe they say, I voted Republican in the past because I think they're better on this or that. Tell them this is the most consequential election for their wallet, their family budget we will ever have. Why? Because Republicans have already said, this is Nick Lota can talk about as much as he wants. They've already told him to pound sand. Nick Lota can't get state and local tax deduction restored because his party took it away and his party doesn't want to restore it because they think red states benefit and blue states get hurt when that state and local tax deduction gets taken away. Democrats, on the other hand, from Chuck Schumer to Hakeem Jeffries on down, and my commitment to you is that we will restore that state and local tax deduction. We will restore the state and local tax deduction that Trump and the Republicans took away. And that is an average of $10,000 back in your family's pocket every year. Mm-hmm. Now add to that expanding the child tax credit, which we did for 1 year mm-hmm. during the pandemic and cut childhood poverty in half. We cut childhood poverty in half when we let it lapse. If you add those things together, that's $6,600 a year for families with small children. And the goal isn't to create permanent handouts and dependency. It's to give people a hand up at a time when they're economically squeezed. And you and I know both that the hardest time is when you've got young kids. It's a lot of new costs, a lot of new expenses, and you need a little bit of a boost. And Kamala Harris has proposed getting a $25,000 first-time homeowner loan. It's about whether you think about the economy, about building it out from the middle up, or it's trickled down from the top down. And I think we all know the frustration folks feel in the middle is that the system works great for billionaires and big businesses, but not so much for small businesses and folks in the middle class and working their way into the middle class. So state and local tax deduction is basic. It's fundamental. Vote Democrat if you want that money back in your pocket that Republicans took away, because Republicans get elected, it is gone for good.
John, where we are talking about some very fundamental changes in the economic and immigration fields, something which is again very, very fundamental, particularly in light of some Supreme Court decisions that came in the past years in this country. Something which was good law for 50 years. I'm talking about abortion rights under Roe v. Wade. Though Democrats failed to codify Roe v. Wade, and we all suffered the consequences. What would you, as a congressman, do to protect the rights and liberties of Americans? Because after those decisions, we just don't see a threat to abortion. We see a threat to other individual liberties. Same-sex marriage. It could go anywhere.
It absolutely could, and that's part of the issue with contraception. They're coming after contraception, IVF, tracking women. Mm-hmm. This is an issue of freedom. Mm-hmm. This is an issue of self-determination. Mm-hmm. I respect that people have deeply held views on this. I really do. And people's opinions should and must be reflecting their faith and the culture they come from. I just don't think they have a right to impose those views on anyone else. Mm. I believe the decision should have an abortion should be between a woman, her doctor, and her God, not the government. Mm. And yes, I said God, because that's part of the calculation in place for individuals. What we're seeing is an assault on freedom. My daughter has fewer rights than my mother. This was the result of decades of ideological power grabbing by folks on the far right. And 3 members of the Supreme Court took an oath to God and in front of the Senate and to all the American people and said, this was settled law. This was settled law. And then the first chance they had, they threw the whole thing out. A 50-year precedent. And as you say, now it's unleashed the whirlwind, right? Margaret Atwood is looking like a prophet. They're coming after contraception. They're coming after IVF. Some of them say, we're not coming after IVF, but then Republicans block legislation to protect IVF in the Senate. So this is fundamental. My opponent, Nick LaLota, your current congressman in New York's 1st District, he cheered the overturning of Roe v. Wade. He celebrated it. He said it was, quote, a step in the right direction. He has said he wants to repeal New York's own abortion laws. I think that is far too far right for our district. 75% of folks here, including a majority of Republicans, believe that this is not the government's decision. And now, of course, he's scared politically, so he's trying to scrub his website, make it sound like he doesn't support any of these things. A vote for Nick LaLota is a vote for Donald Trump, is a vote for Mike Johnson, who wants a national abortion ban. This is the truth. And we've seen how divisive this is. We've seen how they're not trying to stop. And it's totally out of step with the vast majority of Americans' opinions on the subject. And we've seen where there are women dying. This is an issue of maternal mortality. And so I go back to first principles: liberty, equality, self-determination. Kamala Harris, when she was senator, asked Brett Kavanaugh when he was being interviewed for the hearings for a Supreme Court justice appointment, can you think of any laws that we place on men to what they can do with their bodies? Mm-hmm. And he said, no, I can't. What a great question. What a great question we don't think about. Mm-hmm. And this is an economic issue. This is a health issue. This is about health. This is about government mandated pregnancies. How would that work exactly? We've seen how it works in some places. Doctors are afraid to do medically necessary procedures, and in some cases, women die. So, where's the decency? Where's the respect for difference? Where's the focus on freedom and the respect for self-determination on a fundamental level? This is personal for a lot of folks, and it should be, because the freedom was taken away by a bunch of right-wing politicians doing a power grab. And I'd oppose the same kind of ideological power grab if it came from the far left, but this doesn't apply. We're not as divided as our politics makes us think we are. We just need to have the courage and guts to have representatives who reflect that. As a member of Congress, you can vote for things like the Women's Health Protection Act, which would codify Roe. And don't get distracted about some of these BS arguments, because this is really just about, should a woman, a child in some cases, be forced to carry the child of her rapist? I mean, where's the decency? Where's the kindness? Where's the compassion? You talked about kindness earlier. And I know this is our last segment, so I'd like to end on this. One of my political heroes is Abraham Lincoln. One of the things I love about Abraham Lincoln is how globally renowned he was, both for his decision in the midst of a civil war to end slavery here in the United States, but also his commitment, which he never got to enact, to reach out and try to reunite the nation after a civil war. We forget now that he helped save American democracy at a time when people were trying to hijack it and impose their own narrow vision, and said they would ruin the country if they could not rule it. What I like most about Abraham Lincoln, aside the fact that he's one of the best writers who's ever been president, and obviously all his accomplishments, is that he reminds us that character is the most important quality in a president or any elected official or any individual. And especially in the case of Lincoln, what I love most is that he reminds us that kindness is consistent with effective leadership. Kindness is consistent with effective leadership. That's what we're trying to codify with laws regarding equal rights, civil rights, standing up to hate crimes. We're imperfect people trying to form a more perfect union. But we need to remember that kindness is consistent with effective leadership. We need to remember that character counts. We need to apply principles above partisan politics. The opportunities of this election shouldn't be underestimated. We're a great country, and we will do great things together. The consequences, if we don't vote this time, cannot be overstated. This will not be a country that has decided to honor its best principles, its hopes. And that's my hope, is that we all work together, 100% turnout, especially from our communities, to step up and to say, we're going to move forward together. The way forward is together.
John, I am so glad, and you articulated that so well. It is so important to understand this. There are other issues. We need a sense of security from gun attacks. We are coastal region. We wanted to talk about climate as well. The time does not permit, but quickly.
I can speak quickly on those two things if you'd like.
Is there anything you propose to give us a sense of security from this gun insecurity that we feel in this country?
Look, we need to depolarize. We're not as divided as our politics sometimes make it seem.
Mm-hmm.
More than 80% of Americans support common sense violent background checks. So see if someone's got a violent history before they buy a weapon of war.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a Second Amendment in this country, but we don't have to tolerate school shootings or mass shootings, weapons of war being treated as normal. Ronald Reagan used to say, we need guns for hunting, fishing, self-defense, but you don't need a weapon of war to do it, when he was arguing for the assault weapons ban back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
My opponent, current one-term Congressman Nick LaLota, has said we ought to lower the age to buy AR-15s. Lower the age to buy AR-15s. That's not common sense. We need to work together to close violent history background check loopholes. We need to make sure there are red flag laws so people who are mentally unwell can't get their hands on weapons of war. We need to get illegal guns off the street, working with law enforcement. Just like we need to work with law enforcement to get gangs and drugs off our streets. We need to come together to combat climate change because coastal erosion doesn't give a darn what political party you belong to. But there are a lot of politicians who greenwash that and they say, oh, yeah, I care about the environment. But then they go back to Washington and they vote to gut the provisions that have been put in place to help us combat climate change. $2.6 billion to stop coastal erosion. I think we should make it tax deductible for families and small businesses to make their own properties more resilient in the face of climate change, flooding, and coastal erosion. To me, that's just common sense. We need to work towards using Brookhaven National Labs and Stony Brook. Think about the nexus between these two things to create the next clean energy technology revolution right here on Long Island. That's the kind of thing I'm thinking about. That's the kind of thing that should be driving us. Focusing on solutions, not just problems, but also not getting distracted by people in election season pretending they're moderate and then voting for Donald Trump and doing whatever he says. Let's do something better. Let's turn the page. Let's move forward together as we can. We're not as divided as we seem, but we have to win this election to show that.
John, in the last 30 seconds,
yes.
Why should we vote for you rather than your opponent?
Because I am genuinely committed to rebuilding the middle, to focusing on rebuilding middle politics and the middle of our economy, the middle class, because I am an independent voice for you. I'm not going to be there fighting for D or R. I'm fighting for you. My opponent has already shown he will do whatever Donald Trump says. If that means sacrificing border security, that means saying we should repeal New York's own abortion laws. He is far too far right for the district. I'm a person who's a historian, a journalist. I've worked for Democrats and Republicans. I'm married to a Republican. I believe and show that we can work together. My opponent is a person who's been basically a professional politician with patronage jobs before he reached this term in Congress. And he made the decision to be the first purple district representative he's bragged to endorse Donald Trump. There's nothing moderate or common sense about it. So vote for me. I'm honored to have your vote. Let's move forward together.
John, thank you so much for your time today. We wish you all the very best for your campaign.
Thank you.
ਇਹ ਸੀਗੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਫਸਟ ਕੰਗਰੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਡਿਸਟ੍ਰਿਕਟ ਦੇ ਕੈਂਡੀਡੇਟ ਜੌਨ ਐਵਲੌਨ। ਅਸੀਂ ਉਮੀਦ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੋਟ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਜ਼ਰੂਰਤ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਝਦੇ ਹੋ, ਨਾ ਸਿਰਫ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਬਟ ਸਾਰੀ ਪੋਸਟ ਕਾਂਗਰਸ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਔਰ ਡਾਊਨ ਬੈਲਟ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੈ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਇਹ ਮੁਲਕ ਇੱਕ ਐਸੀ ਸਟੇਜ ਤੇ ਖੜਾ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ ਪਾਸੇ ਜਾ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਜਿਸ ਪਾਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਪੋਰਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋ ਜਿਸ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਅੱਛੀ ਲੱਗਦੀ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਸਪੋਰਟ ਕਰੋ, ਬਾਹਰ ਆਓ, ਵੋਟ ਪਾਓ। ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਸ਼ੋਅ ਦੇਖਣ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਬਹੁਤ ਸ਼ੁਕਰੀਆ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੇਖਦੇ ਰਹੋ ਦ ਵੇ ਫਾਰਵਰਡ। ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ।